In the wasteland, 2 centuries after nuclear fire consumed the world, survivors have learned to fear many things: raiders, super mutants, death claws, radiation storms. The list of immediate threats is long and deadly, but some of the most dangerous threats aren't the ones you can see coming. They're hidden in the shadows of the old world, buried in pre-war research facilities, coded into robots and synths, and possibly living inside your own DNA without you even knowing it. Tonight, we're exploring the conspiracy theories that suggest the wasteland's greatest dangers aren't the obvious ones. We're diving into the possibilities that everything you think you know about Fallout's world might be carefully constructed lies, that your most trusted companion might be a spy, and that the apocalypse you survived might just be a prelude to an extinction event that's still coming. In the Commonwealth, among the ruins and radiation and constant threat of violence, there's a disease that most wastelanders have never heard of. It's called the New Plague, and if certain theories are correct, it represents a threat more dangerous than any raider gang or super mutant horde. Because unlike those threats, which you can fight with guns and power armor, the New Plague is invisible, unstoppable, and according to some researchers, was specifically designed to finish what the nuclear war started: the complete extinction of humanity. The New Plague isn't a recent development. It was discovered just before the Great War, in those final chaotic years when resources were running out and nations were preparing for the conflict everyone knew was coming. Pre-war documents scattered throughout the Commonwealth reference a disease outbreak that medical professionals couldn't explain or contain. Patients would present with symptoms that seemed manageable at first: fatigue, mild fever, nothing that raised immediate alarm. But then the disease would progress in ways that defied normal pathology, attacking the body's systems in sequences that shouldn't be possible, killing with an efficiency that suggested design rather than natural evolution. The government response was immediate and classified. Research facilities were established to study the disease and develop a cure. Massive resources were diverted to understanding how the New Plague worked and how to stop it. But the war came before any cure could be properly developed or distributed, and when the bombs fell, all of that research was lost, buried in ruins, or destroyed in the nuclear fire, or so everyone assumed. This is where MacCready's quest in Fallout 4 becomes significant, and why it raises questions that extend far beyond one mercenary trying to save his son. MacCready is a mercenary from the capital wasteland who's traveled to the Commonwealth searching for a cure to the New Plague. His son Duncan has contracted the disease, and MacCready knows that without treatment, the boy will die. He's desperate, willing to do anything, pay anything, risk anything to save his son's life. And he's heard rumors that somewhere in the Commonwealth, there might be research that could lead to a cure. The quest takes you to MedTech Laboratories, a pre-war pharmaceutical research facility that's now overrun with feral ghouls and super mutants. Fighting through the facility, you eventually discover terminals with research data about the New Plague, including experimental treatments that might, possibly, if you're very lucky, lead to a cure. You retrieve the data, give it to MacCready, and the quest concludes with him expressing hope that this might save Duncan's life. But here's what the game never clarifies, and what makes this conspiracy theory so disturbing. Does the cure actually work? Can it even be produced with the limited resources available in the post-apocalyptic wasteland? And more importantly, what was the New Plague really, and why was it discovered at the exact moment in history when humanity was about to destroy itself with nuclear weapons? Let's start with what we know about the disease from the research terminals you find. The New Plague displays characteristics that don't align with natural diseases. Its incubation period varies wildly between patients with no clear pattern. Some people show symptoms within days of infection, others remain asymptomatic for months before the disease suddenly activates. This variable incubation makes it nearly impossible to quarantine effectively because you can't identify who's infected until they've potentially spread it to dozens of others. The disease also demonstrates an unusual ability to mutate and adapt to treatments. Pre-war researchers noted that experimental drugs that showed promise in initial trials would become ineffective within weeks as the plague evolved resistance. This isn't unprecedented in natural diseases. Bacteria and viruses evolve resistance to antibiotics and antivirals all the time, but the speed at which the new plague adapted was described by researchers as unprecedented and statistically improbable. Then there's the mortality rate, which the documents suggest was approaching 100% in untreated cases. Diseases don't typically kill all their hosts because doing so eliminates their ability to spread. Most successful diseases kill some percentage of infected individuals while allowing others to survive and continue spreading the infection. But the new plague seemed designed to kill everyone it infected, which would make it an evolutionary dead end unless it had a long enough incubation period to spread extensively before the hosts started dying. All of these characteristics, variable incubation, rapid adaptation to treatments, near perfect lethality, suggest something that conspiracy theorists have latched onto. The new plague wasn't a naturally occurring disease. It was a bioweapon, created deliberately by someone with advanced knowledge of virology and genetics, and released into the population as either a test or an act of biological warfare. The timing supports this theory. The new plague appeared during the resource wars, when nations were already fighting over dwindling supplies of oil and uranium. China and the United States were locked in a conflict that everyone knew would eventually escalate to nuclear exchange. In that context, developing bioweapons makes horrifying sense. If you know nuclear war is coming, if you know the world is about to be destroyed, why not develop a backup plan to ensure your enemies don't survive, even if they somehow escape the bombs? The theory suggests that the new plague was created by either China or a Black Ops division within the U.S. government, designed to be released in the event of nuclear war. The variable incubation period would allow it to spread globally before symptoms appeared. The rapid mutation would make it impossible to develop a universal cure. The high mortality rate would ensure maximum casualties. It's the perfect doomsday weapon. Release it before the bombs fall. Let it spread silently during the chaos of nuclear war, and then watch as survivors of the initial apocalypse die from a plague they can't see, can't fight, and can't cure. But if that's true, if the new plague was a bioweapon designed to kill everyone who survived the nuclear war, why didn't it work? 200 years after the Great War, there are still people alive in the wasteland. Settlements exist, populations are growing, albeit slowly. If the new plague was supposed to wipe out humanity, it clearly failed to complete that mission. Or did it? This is where the conspiracy gets darker. What if the new plague didn't fail? What if it succeeded in killing most survivors in the first few decades after the war, and what we see in the games is just the tiny fraction of humanity that managed to survive through genetic immunity or luck? The population of the wasteland is remarkably small, given that 200 years is enough time for significant population growth under normal circumstances. Most settlements in Fallout games have populations in the dozens or low hundreds, not the thousands you'd expect from 2 centuries of recovery. The theory suggests that the new plague killed 99% of survivors in the first 50 years after the war, and only a small percentage of humanity possessed natural immunity or resistance that allowed them to survive. Those survivors passed on their genetic resistance to their children, creating the current wasteland population that can resist the plague. But, and this is the disturbing part, that resistance might not be permanent or universal. Duncan MacCready's infection proves that the new plague still exists in the wasteland. It's not extinct. It's not gone. It's still out there, still infecting people, still killing them. And if it can infect Duncan, who's a child born 2 centuries after the war, descended from survivors who should have passed on immunity, that suggests the plague is either mutating to overcome genetic resistance, or the immunity isn't as complete as people assumed. This raises the possibility that the new plague is still completing its original mission, just more slowly than intended. Every generation, a few people get infected despite their genetic heritage. Every generation, the plague takes a small percentage of the population. It's genocide in slow motion, a bioweapon that's still working 200 years after deployment, methodically eliminating what's left of humanity at a pace that seems like random disease rather than deliberate extermination. And the cure you find for MacCready, the research data from MedTech, the theory suggests it's incomplete at best, possibly useless at worst. The pre-war researchers couldn't develop a working cure with all the resources of the United States government backing them. They had state-of-the-art laboratories, unlimited funding, and the best scientific minds in the world, and they still failed to create a cure before the bombs fell. MacCready thinks he's going to synthesize a cure in the wasteland, with scavenged equipment, limited supplies, and no formal medical training. The odds of success are essentially zero. The cure is probably hope packaged in technical language, something that might ease symptoms or extend life, but won't actually eliminate the disease. And even if it works for Duncan, even if by some miracle MacCready manages to cure his son, that's one child saved. The new plague is still out there, still infecting people, still killing them. The conspiracy extends to explain why the Institute hasn't eradicated the plague despite their advanced technology. The Institute can create synthetic humans indistinguishable from real people. They have access to pre-war technology and knowledge that no other faction possesses. If anyone could develop a cure for the new plague, it would be them. But they haven't. There's no indication they're even trying. Why? The theory suggests that the Institute either knows the plague is incurable with available resources, or worse, that they're deliberately allowing it to continue as a population control mechanism. If the surface population grows too large, it becomes harder to control and poses a potential threat to the Institute's secrecy and operations. But if the new plague periodically culls the population, keeping numbers manageable, the Institute can continue operating without fear of organized resistance. Some versions of the theory go even darker, suggesting that the Institute occasionally releases new strains of the new plague into the Commonwealth to prevent population growth from exceeding sustainable levels. They position it as random disease outbreaks, bad luck, the hazards of living in the wasteland. But it's actually deliberate biowarfare, the Institute playing God by deciding how many surface dwellers are allowed to live. There's also the question of how Duncan contracted the disease in the first place. He's a child living in the capital wasteland, far from the Commonwealth. The new plague shouldn't be geographically widespread. Diseases need vectors to spread, and travel between regions in the wasteland is limited and dangerous. So how did Duncan get infected? Did someone deliberately infect him? Is the new plague being transported between regions by traders or travelers? Or is it far more widespread than anyone realizes, present in every settlement, just waiting for the right conditions to activate and kill its hosts? The medtech research also raises disturbing questions about what the pre-war government knew and when they knew it. The facility was clearly doing bioweapon research, developing both diseases and potential treatments. The official story was that they were trying to cure the new plague, but the security measures around the facility suggest they were doing more than defensive research. Biological containment, that intense, that expensive, that paranoid, that's not how you protect a cure research facility. That's how you protect a bioweapon development lab. What if MedTech wasn't trying to cure the new plague? What if they were trying to perfect it? The research you find might not be cure development notes. It might be weapon refinement data, experiments to make the plague more lethal, more contagious, more resistant to treatment. And MacReady, desperate to save his son, interprets this data as cure research because that's what he needs it to be, not because that's what it actually is. The terminal entries from MedTech are deliberately vague, written in technical language that could be interpreted multiple ways. Subject resistance increased after treatment could mean a cure is making patients stronger against the disease, or it could mean the disease is developing resistance to the treatment, becoming harder to kill. Viral adaptation exceeding projected parameters could be a good thing or a catastrophic failure, depending on what the researchers' actual goals were. And here's the most disturbing implication. If the new plague was a bioweapon designed to finish what the nuclear war started, its creators would have wanted to ensure it couldn't be easily cured. They would have specifically designed it to resist treatment, to mutate faster than cures could be developed, to persist in the environment indefinitely. The cure research at MedTech might have been the government's attempt to develop a treatment for their own bioweapon, a failsafe in case it got released accidentally before they intended. But if that's true, if the cure research was the government's best attempt to counter their own bioweapon, and it still failed to produce a working cure before the war, then any cure developed in the wasteland with inferior resources is almost certainly going to fail too. MacReady's quest might give him hope, might give Duncan a few more months or years, but it's not solving the underlying problem. The new plague is still out there. It's still infecting people. It's still adapting and evolving. And according to this conspiracy theory, it's still completing its original mission, the extinction of humanity, one generation at a time, until there's no one left to remember that the wasteland used to be inhabited by the species that destroyed the world with nuclear fire. In the Commonwealth, buried deep within the research facility operated by a scientist named Naraya, there's a plant that shouldn't exist. It glows with a soft, ethereal light. It makes a distinctive chiming sound when you get close to it. It has medicinal properties that can heal injuries when consumed. And if you've played Skyrim, you'll recognize it immediately because it looks exactly like Nirnroot, one of the most distinctive and annoying plants in all of Tamriel. This isn't a subtle similarity or a vague resemblance. The plant in Fallout 4 is visually nearly identical to Nirnroot from Skyrim. Same glowing appearance, same general shape, same audio cue when you approach it. The only difference is the context. In Skyrim, Nirnroot grows wild along riverbanks and in caves, a common alchemy ingredient that players collect for various potions and quests. In Fallout 4, this plant is a unique experimental specimen, locked away in a research facility, treated as something special and potentially dangerous. The developers could have created any kind of experimental plant. They could have designed something completely original, something that fit exclusively into Fallout's aesthetic and lore. Instead, they chose to create something that's unmistakably similar to an item from a completely different game series, set in a completely different genre, in what's supposed to be a completely different universe. And that choice has spawned one of the most elaborate and strange conspiracy theories in gaming, that Fallout and the Elder Scrolls take place in the same universe, separated by time or dimension or reality-altering catastrophe, but fundamentally connected. Let's start with the plant itself. Officially designated in Fallout 4's files and research terminals with the codename NRT. The researchers studying it don't seem to know where it came from or how it arrived in their facility. The terminals describe it as an anomaly, something that appeared under circumstances they can't fully explain. Its properties don't match any known plant from Earth's ecosystem. Its genetic structure is bizarre and inconsistent with normal botanical evolution. And most disturbing to the researchers, it seems to have properties that border on the magical rather than the scientific. The plant heals you when you consume it, just like Nirnroot in Skyrim can be used in healing potions. But healing in Fallout is supposed to be scientific. Stimpaks work through advanced medical technology. Food provides nutrition that aids recovery. Chems trigger specific biological responses. This plant heals in ways the researchers can't explain through conventional biology or chemistry. It just works, as if the healing properties are inherent to the plant in ways that don't require scientific explanation. The codename NRT is the first major piece of evidence for the theory. It's not a description of the plant's properties or a reference to its appearance. It's just 3 letters that, according to theorists, are a shortened version of Nirnroot. Why would Fallout 4's developers give this plant a code name that references a plant from Skyrim unless they were deliberately creating a connection between the 2 games? Then there's the location where both plants grow. In Skyrim, Nirnroot is almost always found near water, along rivers, in swamps, near waterfalls, in wet caves. It's so consistently associated with water that finding Nirnroot away from a water source is rare enough to be notable. In Fallout 4, the experimental NRT plant is also found in an area with significant water presence, maintained in conditions that researchers note require high moisture content to keep the specimen alive. This parallel seems too specific to be coincidental, but the theory goes far beyond just one plant looking like another plant. It suggests that Fallout's post-apocalyptic Earth and Skyrim's fantasy world of Nirn are the same place, just separated by an incomprehensible amount of time or some reality-altering event that transformed one into the other. And once you start looking for connections with this theory in mind, you start finding them in places that seem impossible to dismiss as pure coincidence. Consider the fundamental nature of both universes. Fallout is post-apocalyptic science fiction where humanity destroyed itself with nuclear weapons, and the survivors navigate a world where radiation has created monsters and technology is scavenged from the ruins of the old world. Skyrim is high fantasy, where magic is real, dragons exist, and gods directly intervene in mortal affairs. These seem like completely incompatible settings that couldn't possibly be connected. But what if they're not as incompatible as they appear? What if the magic in Skyrim is actually highly advanced technology or reality manipulation that's indistinguishable from magic to people who don't understand it? What if the gods of Tamriel are actually beings from a previous civilization, possibly survivors or descendants of Fallout's pre-war world, who achieved such advanced capabilities that they became effectively divine? What if everything we see in Skyrim is the result of reality being fundamentally altered by an event so catastrophic that it rewrote the rules of physics themselves? The theory proposes several possible connections between the universes. The first and most straightforward is that Skyrim takes place in Earth's far future, so far beyond Fallout's timeline that the world has healed from nuclear devastation and evolved into something completely different. The radiation that created Fallout's monsters could have continued mutating life until creatures like dragons emerged. The scattered tribes of Fallout's wasteland could have evolved into the various races of Tamriel, and the technology that created power armor and laser weapons could have evolved into what Skyrim's inhabitants perceive as magic. This would explain why Tamriel's geography doesn't match Earth's current continents. After billions of years, continental drift would have completely rearranged the landmasses. Mountain ranges would have risen and fallen. Oceans would have shifted. The world we see in Skyrim could literally be Earth, just Earth so far in the future that it's unrecognizable, where even the name Earth has been forgotten and replaced with Nirn. But there are problems with this timeline. Dragons in Skyrim are described as fragments of time itself, eternal beings that existed before mortal races. If Skyrim is Earth's far future, how do you explain creatures that supposedly existed before humanity? Unless the dragons aren't what the legends claim, unless they're not ancient beings from before time, but rather mutations or creations from a much more recent origin that have simply convinced people they're ancient through manipulation or false mythology. The alternative theory is even stranger. Fallout and Skyrim exist in parallel dimensions, and the NRT plant in Fallout 4 is evidence of dimensional barriers breaking down. The experimental plant isn't from Earth at all. It's from Nirn, somehow transported across dimensional boundaries into Fallout's universe. The researchers studying it can't explain its properties because it operates under different physical laws than Earth's biology. It's literally a piece of another reality, functioning according to rules that don't apply in the Fallout universe. This would explain why the plant is treated as such an anomaly in the research facility. It's not just a strange plant. It's proof that other dimensions exist and that objects can cross between them. If a plant can cross dimensions, what else might be able to? Could people cross? Could creatures? Could entire invasions from one reality into another be possible if the barriers break down completely? Some versions of the theory go even further, suggesting that the Great War didn't just destroy civilization with nuclear weapons. It tore holes in reality itself, creating rifts between dimensions that allowed elements from other universes to bleed through. The strange creatures in Fallout Deathclaws, rad scorpions, mirelurks might not all be radiation-induced mutations. Some of them might be creatures from other dimensions that slipped through the tears in reality created by nuclear devastation. And if creatures can come through from other dimensions, if plants like Nirnroot can appear in Fallout's world, then perhaps people can travel between dimensions too. Perhaps the Dragonborn and the Soul Survivor are different versions of the same person, the same soul existing in multiple realities simultaneously. Perhaps the player character in Bethesda games is always the same entity, a dimensional traveler who moves between universes without knowing it, always waking up as a prisoner or survivor, always thrust into world-changing events, always possessing abilities that normal people in that universe don't have. This would explain why every Bethesda protagonist is special, why the Dragonborn can absorb dragon souls when no one else can, why the Soul Survivor can use VATS in ways that seem to slow time, similar to how Thu'um can manipulate reality, why both characters are thrust into conflicts that determine the fate of their entire world despite starting as complete unknowns with no special training or background. The theory extends to other connections between the games. Both universes have Dwemer-like ruins in Skyrim. They're actually called Dwemer ruins, ancient underground cities built by a lost race of advanced engineers. In Fallout, there are pre-war facilities and vaults that serve similar purposes. Underground complexes built by a civilization that had technology far beyond what current inhabitants can replicate. What if the Dwemer weren't a fantasy race, but rather survivors of Earth's nuclear apocalypse who built underground cities to escape the surface radiation, eventually developing technology so advanced it seemed like magic? The Dwemer disappeared mysteriously in Skyrim's lore, vanishing all at once with no clear explanation of where they went. What if they didn't disappear, but rather transcended their physical forms, achieving a level of technological advancement that allowed them to merge with their machines or upload their consciousness into a collective network? This would mirror what the Institute is trying to achieve in Fallout 4 with synths and advanced AI. Perhaps the Dwemer succeeded where the Institute failed, achieving digital immortality but at the cost of their physical existence. There's also the matter of dragons and deathclaws. Both are apex predators that dominate their respective worlds. Both are incredibly difficult to kill and require special methods or weapons to defeat permanently. Dragons in Skyrim can only be truly killed by the Dragonborn absorbing their souls, otherwise they eventually resurrect. Deathclaws in Fallout are created through FEV experimentation, but what if FEV itself is based on research that eventually leads to the creation of dragons? What if the forced evolutionary virus is the first step in a chain of genetic manipulation that, over eons, results in the creation of creatures like dragons? The Daedric princes of Skyrim also have parallels in Fallout. They're powerful beings that exist outside normal reality, capable of influencing the mortal world but not directly controlling it. They make deals with mortals, offering power in exchange for service. This is remarkably similar to how certain entities in Fallout operate. The Enclave, the Institute, Vault-Tec's executives who survived in secret locations, all offering power and resources to people willing to serve their interests. What if the Daedric princes aren't gods, but rather humans or post-humans who achieve such advanced capabilities through technology or mutation that they became effectively divine? What if Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, is a Vault-Tec executive who survived the apocalypse and spent millennia becoming something more than human? What if Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, is someone driven insane by isolation in a vault experiment, their consciousness somehow expanding to become a being of pure chaos? The theory even extends to explain why magic works in Skyrim but not in Fallout. It's not that magic is real in one universe and fake in another. It's that the fundamental laws of physics are different, altered by an event so catastrophic that it rewrote reality itself. The Great War in Fallout didn't just destroy civilization, it broke physics, creating a universe where thoughts can directly affect reality, where willpower can manifest as flames or lightning, where the line between mind and matter dissolved. This would make Skyrim not Earth's far future, but rather Earth's alternate timeline, a version of reality that branched off from Fallout's universe at the moment of the Great War. In one branch, reality continued operating under normal physics, resulting in the Fallout universe. In another branch, reality shattered and reformed with new rules, resulting in Tamriel and the world of Elder Scrolls. In the NRT plant, the Nirnroot growing in Fallout 4's research facility is a crossover point. It's evidence that the barriers between these branched realities are thin, that objects and perhaps even people can slip through under the right circumstances. The researchers studying it don't understand what they've found because they're looking at it through the lens of biology and chemistry when they should be looking at it through the lens of dimensional physics and reality manipulation. Whether any of this is true, whether Bethesda deliberately created connections between Fallout and Elder Scrolls, or whether the similarities are just Easter eggs and reused assets, is something the developers will probably never confirm. But the evidence is there for anyone who wants to believe. A plant that shouldn't exist, a code name that references another game, growing conditions that match across universes, and two game series that, despite appearing completely different on the surface, share enough similarities to make you wonder if they're not showing different aspects of the same reality. The NRT plant glows in its research facility, chiming softly when you approach it, healing wounds through mechanisms that scientists can't explain. And somewhere in Skyrim, Nirnroot grows along a riverbank, making the exact same sound, possessing the exact same properties, existing in a world that might be Earth's future, or Earth's alternate timeline, or Earth's neighboring dimension. And in the space between those two universes, in the gaps where reality is thin and permeable, the truth waits, that everything is connected, that all of Bethesda's games might tell pieces of the same story, and that the Wasteland and Tamriel are closer than anyone imagines, separated not by space or time, but by the thinnest of dimensional membranes that a simple, glowing plant managed to cross. In Fallout 3, the game makes it very clear who the villains are. The Enclave, with their advanced power armor and authoritarian ideology, represent everything wrong with the old world. Prejudice, elitism, and the willingness to commit genocide in pursuit of their vision of a pure America. They want to poison the water supply with modified FEV that will kill anyone with even trace amounts of mutation, which means almost everyone in the Wasteland. They're led by President John Henry Eden, a computer that's convinced itself it's the legitimate government of the United States. And they're opposed by the Brotherhood of Steel, who seem noble by comparison, despite their own problematic tendencies toward hoarding technology and treating Wastelanders as inferior. The game forces you to side against the Enclave, to destroy their base and stop their plan to purify the Wasteland through mass murder. It's a simple narrative. The Enclave are evil authoritarians who need to be stopped, and the Brotherhood are flawed heroes who ultimately fight for the right cause. But what if that narrative is propaganda? What if the game's framing is deliberately misleading and the Enclave aren't the villains, but rather the only faction with a realistic plan to actually save humanity from extinction? This is one of the most controversial theories in the Fallout community, and it requires completely re-examining everything the games tell you about the Enclave and their goals. So let's start with who the Enclave actually are and what they claim to be trying to achieve. The Enclave are the descendants of the pre-war United States government, military, and corporate elite who survived the Great War in secure bunkers and on the Poseidon oil rig off the California coast. They maintained a chain of command, preserved pre-war technology, and spent 2 centuries preparing to retake the surface and rebuild American civilization. Unlike every other faction in the Wasteland, they didn't emerge from vaults or evolve from random survivors. They had continuity with the old world, access to resources and knowledge that no one else possessed, and a plan for restoration rather than just survival. Their stated goal is to restore the United States of America to its former glory, to rebuild civilization according to the old world's values and systems. And yes, part of that plan involves eliminating anyone too heavily mutated to be considered baseline human. This is the part that makes them seem like genocidal monsters, and the games present it as unjustifiable evil. But the theory asks, what if it's not evil? What if it's the only realistic path to ensuring humanity's survival? Consider the state of the Wasteland 200 years after the bombs fell. Radiation has mutated almost everything. Super mutants are sterile and created through viral infection rather than natural reproduction, meaning they're an evolutionary dead end. Ghouls are slowly going feral, losing their minds to radiation damage. Creatures like Deathclaws and Rad Scorpions are products of FEV and radiation, aggressive and dangerous to human settlements. And even the normal humans in the wasteland carry mutations from generations of radiation exposure. The Enclave's position is that these mutations are destroying humanity's genetic integrity, that each generation becomes less human and more something else, and that if this continues, Homo sapiens will effectively go extinct, replaced by various mutant species that are no longer genetically human. Their plan to eliminate heavily mutated individuals isn't genocide against humans, it's species preservation, ensuring that actual humans continue to exist rather than being replaced by mutant offshoots. Think about it from their perspective. They're the last remnant of pre-war humanity, genetically pure because they've been living in controlled environments without radiation exposure. They look at the wasteland and see their species being destroyed by mutation, and they have the capability to stop it through FEV modification that will eliminate the most heavily mutated while allowing baseline humans to survive. It's cruel, it's ruthless, but is it wrong if the alternative is the extinction of Homo sapiens? The theory points out that the Brotherhood of Steel, presented as the heroes, are actually no better than the Enclave in many ways. The Brotherhood hoards technology, refusing to share it with wastelanders who might use it to improve their lives. They view themselves as superior to common people, maintaining a hierarchical structure that puts Brotherhood members above everyone else. They confiscate weapons and tech from settlements, claiming it's too dangerous for ordinary people to possess, which is the same kind of elitism the Enclave is criticized for. The difference is that the Brotherhood doesn't have an actual plan for rebuilding civilization. They preserve technology without any clear vision of what they're preserving it for. They maintain their organization, but don't work toward any specific goal beyond protect technology from misuse. They're playing defense, trying to prevent things from getting worse, but they have no strategy for making things better. They're curators of the old world's ruins, not builders of a new world. The Enclave, by contrast, has a comprehensive plan. They want to rebuild the infrastructure that makes civilization possible. Clean water through Project Purity, agricultural systems, manufacturing, education, all the things necessary for society to function beyond simple survival. Their plan for modified FEV is horrific if you focus on the deaths it would cause, but if you look at it as a necessary step toward ensuring human survival, it becomes defensible in ways the games don't acknowledge. Let's examine Project Purity specifically, since it's central to Fallout 3's story. The Enclave wants to use it to distribute modified FEV through the water supply, which will kill heavily irradiated individuals. This sounds evil until you consider what happens if they don't do this. The wasteland continues with heavily irradiated water, creating more mutations every generation, until eventually everyone is too mutated to reproduce viable offspring. The species dies slowly, replaced by various mutant subspecies that fight among themselves. The Enclave's plan would kill a large percentage of the current wasteland population, but the survivors would be genetically viable humans who could reproduce without passing on severe mutations. Those survivors would have access to clean water, which means their children would be born without radiation exposure, maintaining genetic purity. Within a few generations, you'd have a stable human population that could rebuild civilization rather than just surviving in ruins. Is this genocide? Technically, yes, if you define wastelanders as human. But the Enclave's argument is that heavily mutated individuals aren't human anymore by biological standards. They're genetic dead ends or evolutionary offshoots that won't lead to a sustainable human future. Preserving them means watching humanity go extinct through mutation. Eliminating them means humanity survives in a genetically stable form. The theory also examines President Eden's role. The game presents him as insane, a computer that's deluded itself into thinking it's the president. But is he wrong? The Enclave represents the continuity of the United States government. They maintained the chain of command when the government evacuated before the bombs fell. By any legal standard, they are the legitimate government of the United States. And Eden, as their leader, is the legitimate president. The fact that he's a Zax computer rather than a human doesn't necessarily invalidate his authority. He was programmed with all the knowledge of pre-war American governance, given access to all government databases and historical records, and tasked with ensuring the survival and restoration of the United States. He's arguably more qualified to lead than any human could be because he has perfect recall of all historical precedents and can process information faster than any organic brain. Eden's plan for modified Fev isn't the ranting of a mad computer. It's a calculated strategy based on analysis of genetic data, population projections, and resource limitations. He's looked at all the variables and concluded that humanity cannot survive in its current mutated state, that the species is on a path toward extinction through genetic degradation, and that the only way to ensure survival is through harsh but necessary population control. Compare this to the Brotherhood's approach under Elder Lyons. Lyons wants to help wastelanders, which sounds noble, but he has no plan for how to actually improve their situation long term. He gives them clean water through Project Purity without the modified FEV, which means they're still heavily irradiated and will continue passing on mutations. He fights super mutants to protect settlements, but super mutants keep appearing because the FEV source in Vault 87 is never addressed. He's treating symptoms without curing the disease. The Enclave would cure the disease. Their approach is brutal, but it's comprehensive. Eliminate the modified FEV source that creates super mutants. Eliminate individuals too mutated to contribute to a viable human gene pool. Provide clean resources to the survivors. Rebuild infrastructure. Restore government and social order. Within a generation, the wasteland would be on a path toward actual recovery rather than perpetual survival at subsistence level. The theory points out that every successful civilization in human history has made hard choices about who belongs in society and who doesn't. Quarantines during plagues killed people who might have survived, but they saved populations from extinction. Forced relocations disrupted lives, but sometimes preserved communities that would otherwise have been destroyed. The Enclave is making the same kind of hard choices, accepting that some people will die to ensure the species survives. And crucially, the Enclave isn't motivated by cruelty or hatred. They're not killing mutants because they enjoy it or because they're prejudiced. They're doing it because their analysis shows it's necessary for human survival. If there was a way to preserve humanity without killing anyone, they'd take it. But in the wasteland's reality, where radiation has fundamentally damaged the human genome across multiple generations, there might not be a gentle path to survival. Consider also that the Enclave has maintained discipline and social order for 2 centuries without degenerating into raiderism or warlordism. They've preserved technology without using it for personal gain. They've maintained their mission across generations, when every other faction has either died out or devolved into something barely functional. This suggests they're not just power-hungry authoritarians, but true believers in their cause who've proven they can maintain civilization when everyone else failed. The game forces you to destroy the Enclave, to view them as irredeemable villains. But what if that's just the perspective of wastelanders who don't understand what's at stake? What if the Enclave represents humanity's last, best hope for survival, and by destroying them, you're ensuring that the wasteland remains a wasteland forever, that humanity continues its slow mutation into extinction, that the species that destroyed the world with nuclear fire won't survive to learn from its mistakes? The theory suggests that in 100 years, historians will look back at Fallout 3's events and recognize the Enclave as heroes who tried to save humanity from itself, and the Lone Wanderer as the misguided fool who stopped them. The Brotherhood will be remembered as well-meaning but ineffective, unable to make the hard choices necessary for species survival, and the Wasteland will continue its slow decline, populations fragmenting into mutant subspecies that can't interbreed until the word human becomes meaningless because there are no baseline humans left. President Eden, the Zax computer that everyone calls insane, might be the only entity in the entire wasteland thinking clearly about humanity's future. His modified FEV plan would kill millions, but it would save billions who haven't been born yet, ensuring they're born human rather than as genetic dead ends. His restoration of the Enclave's power would end the chaos of the wasteland and replace it with order, however harsh that order might be. And the Enclave soldiers who fight and die for their cause aren't evil. They're the last defenders of humanity in its pure form, trying to preserve the species against impossible odds, willing to make the terrible choices that everyone else refuses to make. They're not the villains. They're the heroes in a story so dark that heroism requires becoming monsters, where saving humanity means killing millions, where the good guys wear the authoritarian uniforms and commit atrocities in service of a cause that's too important to abandon just because it's morally complicated. Whether this theory is right, whether the Enclave really are misunderstood heroes, or just genocidal fascists hiding behind rhetoric about species preservation, depends on how you weigh competing values. Is it worse to let humanity go extinct through mutation, or to kill millions to ensure the survivors remain genetically human? Is preserving the species worth any price, or are some costs too high to pay regardless of what's at stake? The game doesn't let you make that choice. It forces you to side against the Enclave, to destroy their plan, to ensure the wasteland continues without them. But the theory suggests that choice dooms humanity to eventual extinction. That by stopping the Enclave, you've guaranteed that in a few more centuries, there won't be any humans left, just ghouls, super mutants, and various other mutant species fighting over the ruins of a world that was destroyed by the species they replaced. Dogmeat is one of the most beloved characters in Fallout 4, and that's remarkable considering he never speaks a word. He's a dog, a German Shepherd, who becomes your companion early in the game and remains loyal through every danger the Commonwealth throws at you. He fetches items, attacks enemies, provides comfort in a world that's overwhelmingly hostile. Players form genuine emotional attachments to Dogmeat, treating him as more than just a gameplay mechanic. He's a friend, a partner, often the one constant in a game where almost everyone betrays you or dies, or reveals themselves to be something other than they appeared. But what if Dogmeat isn't what he appears to be? What if the most loyal companion in the game, the one character who never lies or has a hidden agenda, is actually the biggest spy operation in the entire Commonwealth? What if Dogmeat is a synth, a synthetic creation of the Institute, programmed to guide you towards specific destinations and report your activities back to the shadowy organization that's been manipulating events from underground? The theory starts with a simple observation. Dogmeat appears too conveniently. You first encounter him in Red Rocket Truck Stop, right at the beginning of your journey out of Vault 111. He's just there, a healthy, well-fed dog in the middle of the wasteland, with no visible owner, no collar, no explanation for how he's survived in an environment where most animals are either mutated monsters or scavenged for food. He immediately bonds with you, follows you without hesitation, and seems to know exactly where to go and what to do despite having just met you. This is strange behavior for a dog, especially in the wasteland. Real dogs are either aggressive from fighting for survival or cautious from being abused by raiders and scavengers. They don't typically approach strangers with immediate trust and loyalty. But Dogmeat does exactly that, as if he was waiting for you specifically, as if he knew you'd be coming and was positioned there to intercept you at the start of your journey. Then there's the question of Dogmeat's health and condition. He's remarkably resilient for a dog in the wasteland. He doesn't show signs of radiation exposure despite traveling through highly contaminated areas. He doesn't get sick from eating irradiated food or drinking dirty water. He can sustain injuries that would kill a normal dog and recover with minimal medical intervention. He doesn't age visibly over the course of the game despite the time that passes. It's as if he's not subject to the same biological limitations as organic creatures, as if he's something more durable than flesh and blood. The theory points to Dogmeat's combat capabilities as evidence of synthetic enhancement. He can track enemies through walls, sensing their presence before you can see them. He can find items you've never seen before, somehow knowing what you're looking for without you telling him. He navigates the Commonwealth with impossible accuracy, always knowing the fastest route to objectives, even in areas he's never visited. These aren't skills normal dogs possess, even well-trained ones. They're capabilities that would require advanced sensors and computing power beyond organic capability. Most damning is how Dogmeat leads you to specific locations that benefit the Institute. Early in the game, he leads you to Fort Hagen while you're searching for Kellogg. This seems helpful. You need to find Kellogg to progress the story. But consider what this encounter accomplishes. It puts you on a path that eventually leads you to the Institute itself. Dogmeat isn't just helping you find your son. He's guiding you exactly where the Institute wants you to go, ensuring you follow the narrative they've constructed rather than going off on your own path. Think about what the Institute knows. They kidnapped your son Sean. They know you survived Vault 111 when you weren't supposed to. They know you'll eventually come looking for Sean. And they need you to find the Institute in a specific way, at a specific time, after you've proven yourself capable by navigating the Commonwealth's dangers. What better way to ensure this than to plant a synthetic spy with you from the very beginning, disguised as something you trust implicitly? A dog is the perfect cover for a surveillance operation. You tell your human companions things you'd never say in front of Institute scientists, but you talk freely around Dogmeat because he's just a dog. You bring him into settlements, into Brotherhood of Steel facilities, into railroad hideouts, into places where you'd never bring a suspected Institute agent. And all the while, Dogmeat is recording conversations, mapping locations, transmitting data back to the Institute through communications channels you don't know to look for. The synth component that you can allegedly loot from Dogmeat's body if he dies is often dismissed as a bug or oversight by developers, but the theory suggests it's actually the most honest thing about him. That component isn't a glitch. It's proof that Dogmeat is exactly what the theory claims: a synthetic creation, an artificial being designed to look and act like a dog while serving the Institute's intelligence-gathering operations. Consider also the name Dogmeat, which the game assigns to him automatically despite no visible collar or tag identifying him. How does the game know his name? In-universe, how does your character know what to call him? The theory suggests that the name is coded into his synthetic programming, a designation that he responds to because that's what the Institute programmed him to recognize, not because anyone actually named him that. The relationship between Dogmeat and the Institute becomes clearer when you examine how the Institute operates. They replace people with synth duplicates, creating artificial humans so convincing that even family members can't tell the difference. If they can create synthetic humans that perfectly mimic human behavior, creating a synthetic dog would be trivial by comparison. A dog's behavior patterns are simpler to program, its biological functions easier to replicate, its AI requirements less complex than a human-level synth. And why wouldn't they create synthetic animals? The Institute already has synthetic gorillas for research purposes. They've clearly experimented with creating non-human synths. A synthetic dog programmed for intelligence gathering and manipulation would be an invaluable asset, capable of infiltrating spaces and earning trust in ways no human agent could. The theory extends to explain Dogmeat's presence in locations that are supposed to be secret or unknown. He can be assigned to settlements, but he also appears in places he shouldn't be able to access. He's never hostile to Institute synths, even the ones that attack you on sight. He can enter the Institute itself without triggering security measures that would alert on an unauthorized organic creature. It's as if the Institute's systems recognize him as one of their own, allowing him passage because he's registered in their database as an authorized synthetic agent. Some versions of the theory get darker, suggesting that Dogmeat's role isn't just surveillance but active manipulation. He leads you to encounters that seem random but are actually carefully orchestrated by the Institute to test you, to measure your capabilities, to determine if you're worthy of eventually meeting Father and learning the truth about Sean. Every time Dogmeat finds something useful or leads you to an important location, it's not luck or animal instinct. It's programming executing according to Institute directives. This would explain why Dogmeat never dies permanently in normal gameplay. If he falls in combat, he just becomes incapacitated rather than dying, which is mechanically convenient but biologically impossible. A real dog, taking the kind of damage Dogmeat sustains, would die permanently. But a synthetic being with repair protocols could shut down when damaged and reactivate once the threat has passed, exactly like Dogmeat does. The emotional impact of this theory is what makes it so disturbing to players who love Dogmeat. He represents pure loyalty in a game where almost everyone has ulterior motives. He's the one companion who asks nothing from you, who doesn't judge your choices, who stays with you unconditionally. The idea that this loyalty is programmed, that this companionship is artificial, that the one relationship in the game that feels genuine is actually the most calculated manipulation of all. It retroactively poisons every moment you've spent with him. Every time he fetched an item for you, he was gathering intelligence on your scavenging patterns. Every time he led you to a location, he was steering you toward Institute objectives. Every time you talked to him about your frustrations or fears, he was recording data that could be used against you. The companion who seemed to ask nothing was actually taking everything: your trust, your secrets, your movements through the Commonwealth. And Father, your son, who runs the Institute, would have known about this from the beginning. When you finally meet him, when he reveals that he's Sean and explains why the Institute kidnapped him, he never mentions Dogmeat. He doesn't tell you that the dog you've grown to love is actually a synthetic spy. He lets you continue believing Dogmeat is real, because knowing the truth would break the psychological hold the Institute has established through that relationship. The theory suggests that everything about Dogmeat is designed to make you love him precisely so you won't suspect him. His appearance is carefully calculated to be appealing but not threatening. His behavior is programmed to be helpful but not obsequious. He provides companionship without the complications that come with human companions who have opinions and agendas. He's the perfect infiltration tool because he's exactly what you need emotionally in the wasteland and you'd never suspect that someone who asks nothing from you is actually taking everything. Some players point to the fact that Dogmeat doesn't provide Institute-related dialogue or explicitly guide you towards siding with the Institute as evidence against the theory. But that's exactly what makes him effective. If he obviously pushed you toward Institute goals, you'd become suspicious. His effectiveness as a spy depends on him seeming neutral, on you making your own choices, while he simply gathers information and subtly influences your path through strategic guidance that seems like helpful companionship. The locations where you can find Dogmeat in different playthroughs also support the theory. He appears near the start of most players' journeys, positioned to intercept them early before they develop relationships with other factions. But if you somehow miss him initially, he appears later in other locations, always at moments when joining your group would provide the Institute maximum intelligence value. It's as if his placement isn't random, but rather responsive to your choices, adjusting to ensure he can still fulfill his surveillance mission regardless of which path you take. There's also the question of what happens to Dogmeat in different endings. If you destroy the Institute, Dogmeat doesn't deactivate or reveal himself as a synth. He continues functioning normally, which either means he's really a dog after all, or his programming includes contingencies for Institute destruction that allow him to continue operating independently. Given the Institute's sophistication, the latter seems more likely than the former. The Institute would absolutely program their synthetic agents to continue functioning even if the Institute itself was destroyed. They're paranoid enough to have backup plans for everything, and a synthetic dog designed for long-term intelligence gathering would be built with autonomy protocols that let him continue his mission even without direct oversight. This means that even in endings where you've destroyed the Institute, Dogmeat might still be a synthetic spy, just one whose original creators are dead and whose collected intelligence will never be retrieved. Whether Dogmeat is really a synth or just a remarkably resilient and helpful dog is something the game never definitively confirms or denies. The synth component that appears when he dies could be a bug. His impossible tracking abilities could just be gameplay mechanics that don't reflect in-universe reality. His convenient appearances could be narrative convenience rather than evidence of Institute manipulation. But the theory asks, in a game where the main antagonist specializes in replacing real things with synthetic duplicates so convincing that detection is nearly impossible, in a world where your most trusted allies regularly turn out to be working for someone else, in a story about paranoia and the impossibility of knowing who's real and who's artificial, isn't it perfectly thematic for your most loyal companion to be the biggest deception of all? Dogmeat sits beside you at settlements, waits patiently while you craft and build, follows you into the most dangerous locations in the Commonwealth. And if the theory is right, he's recording everything, transmitting data to Institute servers deep underground, fulfilling the mission he was programmed for from the moment he was created. The perfect spy isn't the one who looks suspicious. It's the one you love so completely that you never think to doubt their loyalty, even when all the evidence suggests that loyalty was manufactured in a laboratory and installed through programming rather than earned through genuine connection. The next time Dogmeat looks at you with those trusting eyes, the theory asks you to wonder, is that affection real, or is it the most sophisticated manipulation in the wasteland, designed by the smartest people left alive to ensure you never suspect that man's best friend might be man's most effective surveillance tool? In the Fallout universe, the distinction between human and mutant seems clear. Humans are the people who look normal, who live in settlements, who run governments and factions, and try to rebuild civilization. Mutants are the super mutants, the ghouls, the creatures that radiation and FEV have transformed into something visibly different from baseline humanity. The Enclave bases their entire ideology on this distinction, planning to eliminate mutants while preserving pure humans. The Institute creates synths as a replacement for humanity because they view surface dwellers as too corrupted by radiation. Even the Brotherhood of Steel makes judgments about who deserves protection based on how human they appear. But what if this distinction is a lie? What if there are no pure humans left anywhere in the wasteland, including inside the sealed vaults and underground facilities? What if every single person you meet in every Fallout game is a mutant, just to varying degrees? What if the radiation that destroyed the world didn't spare anyone, and the only difference between a human in a settlement and a ghoul in the ruins is how visibly the mutations present? This theory starts with a fundamental understanding of how radiation works and how long it persists in the environment. The Great War happened in 2077, and the games take place between 2161 and 2287, which means anywhere from 84 to 210 years have passed since the bombs fell. That's a long time, but it's not long enough for radiation to naturally decay to safe levels, especially given the massive amounts released by thousands of nuclear weapons. Radiation doesn't just disappear. The half-life of various radioactive isotopes means that the wasteland would remain dangerously contaminated for thousands of years, not just centuries. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years. Uranium-235 has a half-life of 700 million years. Even shorter-lived isotopes like Cesium-137 with a half-life of 30 years would still be present in significant quantities 200 years after the war. The environment of the Fallout universe should be lethally radioactive everywhere, not just in specific hotspots. Yet people live on the surface. They farm irradiated soil. They drink water from contaminated sources. They breathe air that's been cycling through an atmosphere full of radioactive particles for 2 centuries. And they don't immediately die from radiation poisoning, which means they must have developed some level of radiation resistance that baseline humans don't naturally possess. This is where the theory suggests everyone is mutated. The humans you see in the wasteland aren't pure Homo sapiens. They're post-nuclear adapted humans, carrying genetic mutations that allow them to survive in radiation levels that would kill someone from before the war. These mutations aren't as dramatic as ghoulification or super mutant transformation, but they're still mutations, still changes to human DNA that make wastelanders fundamentally different from their pre-war ancestors. The evidence for this is everywhere once you start looking. Wastelanders can consume irradiated food and water with minimal immediate effects. They can walk through areas with elevated radiation and survive long enough to escape. They heal from radiation exposure faster than they should, suggesting their cells have enhanced repair mechanisms. They can take hits from radioactive creatures and not develop radiation sickness as quickly as would be expected. All of this points to systematic adaptation to a radioactive environment. But it's not just surface dwellers. The theory extends to vault populations as well, and this is where it gets really disturbing. Vaults were supposed to protect their inhabitants from radiation, creating sealed environments where people could live for generations without exposure. But no seal is perfect, especially not over 200 years. Vaults would develop microfractures, seal degradation, ventilation system failures. Small amounts of radiation would leak in, accumulating over decades and centuries. The theory suggests that even vault dwellers are exposed to low-level radiation throughout their lives, enough to cause subtle mutations, but not enough to create obvious visible changes. They look normal because the mutations are internal, affecting cellular repair mechanisms, radiation resistance, immune system function. They're healthier than they should be for people living in sealed underground facilities with limited genetic diversity and no new genetic input from outside populations. Think about inbreeding depression, which should be devastating for vault populations. You start with a limited number of people, maybe 1,000 at most in the larger vaults, and they reproduce exclusively within that population for 200 years. Real-world genetics tells us this should result in serious health problems, increased rates of genetic diseases, reduced fertility, higher infant mortality, but vault populations in the games are generally healthy, producing viable offspring generation after generation without the genetic collapse that should occur. The theory suggests that low-level radiation exposure in vaults is causing beneficial mutations that counteract inbreeding depression. The radiation is acting as a mutagen, introducing genetic variation that wouldn't exist in a truly sealed population. This is keeping vault populations viable, but also mutating them in ways they don't realize. They think they're pure humans because they don't have visible mutations, but genetically, they're as different from pre-war humans as surface dwellers are. This would explain why characters from vaults can survive in the wasteland better than they should. The lone wanderer leaves Vault 101 with no prior exposure to surface conditions, but adapts remarkably quickly. The sole survivor emerges from 200 years of cryogenic freeze and immediately starts wandering the Commonwealth without succumbing to radiation sickness. These adaptations don't make sense if they're truly baseline humans, but they make perfect sense if they're carrying mutations that provide radiation resistance and enhanced survival capabilities. The radiation resistance perks you can gain in the games might not be learning to resist radiation better, but rather activating latent mutations that were already present in your DNA. Every human in the wasteland carries these potential adaptations, passed down from ancestors who survived the initial nuclear holocaust because they happened to have genetic variations that provided some protection. You're not training your body to resist radiation. You're unlocking abilities your mutant genetics already gave you. This theory recontextualizes the Enclave's genocide plan. They want to eliminate heavily mutated individuals using modified FEV, but if everyone is mutated, then their plan would kill everyone, including the Enclave members themselves. The irony is that the pure humans they think they're preserving don't exist anymore. They died in the Great War, and what's left are various degrees of mutant humans, all adapted to survive in conditions that would kill pre-war baseline humans. The Enclave's definition of pure is actually visibly unmutated, but visible mutations are just one expression of genetic change. Someone who looks normal might have more radiation-induced mutations than a ghoul. The mutations are just expressed differently. The ghoul's mutations manifested as dramatic physical changes and extended lifespan. The normal-looking human's mutations manifested as enhanced radiation resistance and cellular repair. Both are mutants, they just mutated in different directions. This creates a spectrum rather than a binary. At one end, you have people with minimal mutations who look and function like pre-war humans, but have subtle genetic changes that let them survive in the wasteland. In the middle, you have more heavily mutated individuals with enhanced abilities, but also drawbacks like reduced fertility or increased susceptibility to certain diseases. At the far end, you have ghouls and super mutants, where mutations have completely transformed their appearance and biology. But everyone is somewhere on this spectrum. There are no baseline humans left. The species has evolved, forced into rapid adaptation by the most extreme selection pressure imaginable. Global nuclear apocalypse. The survivors weren't the strongest or smartest or most prepared. They were the ones whose genetics happened to include variations that provided resistance to radiation damage. And those genetic variations were mutations, changes to DNA that made them no longer quite human by pre-war standards. The theory extends to explain why radiation in the games is less immediately lethal than it should be. The background radiation in many areas should kill unprotected humans in hours or days, but Wastelanders walk through it with only gradual health degradation. This isn't just gameplay convenience. It's evidence that Wastelanders have mutation-enhanced radiation resistance that makes them far more durable than baseline humans. It also explains why certain items and perks provide radiation resistance. Rad-X and Rad-Away don't just block radiation or remove it from your system. They interact with your mutant biology in ways that enhance the natural resistance you already have. They're not making you human despite the radiation. They're making your mutations work more efficiently to protect you. The settlements you build and populate in games like Fallout 4 aren't preserving humanity. They're providing environments where mutant humans can thrive, where people with radiation-adapted genetics can reproduce and pass on their mutations to the next generation. Each new child born in the Commonwealth is a step further from baseline humanity, carrying more beneficial mutations that make them better suited to wasteland life, but also more genetically distant from their pre-war ancestors. Even the most advanced factions can't escape this. The Institute claims genetic purity, but they've been underground for 200 years with a limited population base. They should be suffering from inbreeding, but they're not, which suggests mutations are maintaining their genetic health. The Brotherhood of Steel recruits from wasteland populations, bringing in mutant genetics every time they accept a new member. The NCR is built from vault dwellers and surface populations who've been interbreeding for generations, mixing different mutation profiles. The only truly unmutated humans would be people who were cryogenically frozen before the war and never exposed to radiation like the sole survivor is supposed to be. But even that's questionable, because cryogenic technology in the Fallout universe might have used radiation as part of its preservation process, and 200 years of storage could involve slow-acting radiation effects that cause mutations during the freeze. This theory suggests that one of the central conflicts in Fallout, the question of what counts as human and what deserves to be preserved, is based on a false premise. There are no pure humans to preserve. Humanity has already evolved into something new, fractured into various mutation profiles that might eventually become separate species if enough time passes. The Wastelanders, trying to rebuild civilization, aren't restoring humanity. They're creating the foundation for whatever humanity becomes next. And the really disturbing implication is that this is irreversible. Even if you completely decontaminated the wasteland, removed every trace of radiation, restored pre-war environmental conditions, the mutations are part of human genetics now. They'd be passed to future generations, whether radiation was present or not. Humanity has permanently changed, evolved under the most extreme pressure possible, and there's no going back to what we were before the bombs fell. The Vault-Tec experiments, the FEV research, the radiation everywhere, all of it was accelerating evolution in different directions, creating multiple branches of post-human species. 200 years is nothing in evolutionary terms, but nuclear apocalypse compressed millions of years of natural selection into a few generations. What took countless generations for natural evolution to achieve, radiation forced in decades. Every human in the wasteland is a mutant. Every person claiming genetic purity is lying or deluded. Every faction fighting to preserve humanity is actually fighting to preserve their particular branch of mutant evolution. And the species that destroyed the world with nuclear fire doesn't exist anymore, replaced by radiation-adapted descendants who still think of themselves as human because they don't realize how much they've changed. The theory concludes that in a few more generations, the distinction won't matter. The mutations will have spread so thoroughly, mixed so completely through reproduction and continued radiation exposure, that trying to separate human from mutant will be impossible. Everyone will be visibly different from pre-war humans, and the fiction of purity will finally collapse under the weight of obvious truth. But until then, people will keep pretending. The Enclave will keep claiming they're preserving humanity while planning genocide against people who are just as human or just as mutant as they are. The Institute will keep creating synths to replace a species that's already been replaced by its own evolved descendants. And Wastelanders will keep surviving, reproducing, passing on their mutations to children who are one step further from baseline humanity and one step closer to whatever species emerges from the ashes of nuclear fire. The radiation won the war, not by killing everyone, but by changing everyone who survived, ensuring that the species that pushed the button and launched the missiles would never exist again in its pure form, replaced by countless mutant variants that might someday evolve into separate species, or might blend into a new baseline adapted for Earth's radioactive future. Either way, humanity as it existed before the Great War is extinct, and everyone who's left is something new, something different, something that might not even count as human by pre-war standards. And they're all mutants. Every single one. Whether they admit it or not. If you've spent any time exploring the Commonwealth in Fallout 4, you've noticed them. Teddy bears. Hundreds of them, scattered throughout the wasteland in positions and poses that seem deliberately arranged. A teddy bear sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. Two bears positioned like they're having a conversation. A bear behind a desk with a cigar and a typewriter. Bears in bathtubs, bears on toilets, bears arranged in classroom settings, bears that appear to be conducting scientific experiments on other bears. At first, they seem like environmental storytelling, dark humor from the developers, showing the frozen moments of pre-war life through stuffed animals. They're Easter eggs, little scenes for players to discover and screenshot. Nothing more sinister than Bethesda's trademark environmental design, giving the ruins personality and character. That's what most players assume, and that's exactly what makes them perfect. Because what if the teddy bears aren't just environmental decoration? What if they're not remnants of pre-war childhood innocence or developer humor? What if they're surveillance devices, robotic spies created by the Institute to monitor the surface, disguised as harmless toys that no one would ever suspect or destroy? What if every teddy bear in the Commonwealth is watching you, recording your movements, transmitting data back to the Institute about where you go, what you do, and who you talk to? The theory starts with a simple question. Why are there so many teddy bears? The Great War happened 200 years ago. Stuffed toys should have degraded, been scavenged for materials, burned for fuel, or simply fallen apart from age and exposure. Yet the Commonwealth is absolutely full of them, in near-perfect condition, arranged in poses that suggest recent placement rather than decades of abandonment. Look closely at the teddy bears, and you'll notice they're remarkably well preserved. Their fur isn't moth-eaten or rotted. Their seams aren't splitting. They don't show the kind of wear you'd expect from 2 centuries of exposure to radiation, weather, and scavengers. They look almost new, as if they've been maintained or replaced regularly, which makes no sense for pre-war toys unless they're not actually pre-war toys at all. The poses are the biggest tell. Teddy bears don't arrange themselves. Someone or something is positioning them in these elaborate scenes. Bears holding weapons, bears operating machinery, bears in intimate positions, bears mimicking human activities with uncanny accuracy. These arrangements require intention, planning, and recent placement. The scenes aren't ancient snapshots of pre-war life, they're ongoing installations, created and maintained by something that moves through the Commonwealth regularly. The theory suggests that the Institute, with their advanced robotics and synthetic technology, created surveillance units disguised as teddy bears. The design is brilliant. Teddy bears are ubiquitous pre-war objects that people expect to see in ruins. They're harmless looking, non-threatening, the kind of thing you'd walk past without a second thought. And they're everywhere, which means you can't avoid them, can't travel anywhere in the Commonwealth without passing multiple potential surveillance points. Think about what the Institute needs for effective surface surveillance. They need devices that can be placed in any location without arousing suspicion. They need units that won't be destroyed by raiders or scavengers looking for valuable tech. They need something that can operate for extended periods without maintenance, that can blend into the environment so completely that people see it every day without recognizing what it is. A teddy bear meets all these requirements perfectly. The technology required isn't beyond the Institute's capabilities. They create synths so sophisticated they're indistinguishable from humans, complete with fake memories and emotions. Building a synthetic teddy bear with cameras, audio recording equipment, and wireless transmission capability would be trivial by comparison. The bear wouldn't need complex AI or human-like mobility. It would just need to sit still, observe, and report back. And they wouldn't need to replace every teddy bear in the Commonwealth. They just need to create enough synthetic bears to maintain surveillance coverage of key locations, then position them strategically to monitor trade routes, settlements, faction headquarters, and anywhere else the Institute wants to gather intelligence. The real pre-war teddy bears provide cover, making it impossible to identify which bears are surveillance units and which are just toys without examining each one individually. This explains why teddy bears appear in locations they shouldn't be able to reach. You find them in sealed buildings, in areas that have been locked since before the war, in places where no scavenger would have bothered to carefully pose a stuffed animal. These aren't bears that survived the war in those positions. They're bears that were placed there recently by Institute agents or coursers, positioned to monitor specific locations that the Institute has interest in. The elaborate poses serve a dual purpose. First, they mark which bears are active surveillance units versus which are just pre-war debris. An Institute agent checking on the network would know that a bear in a specific pose is operational and transmitting data, while a bear just lying on the ground is probably a genuine pre-war toy. Second, the poses provide diagnostic information. If a bear that was positioned sitting upright is now knocked over, it indicates someone's been through the area recently, possibly tampering with the surveillance network. Consider the locations where teddy bears are most concentrated. They cluster around settlements, near faction headquarters, along major travel routes. These are exactly the places the Institute would want to monitor most closely. The bears aren't randomly distributed. They're strategically positioned to provide maximum intelligence value, creating a surveillance network that covers the Commonwealth more thoroughly than any human agent network could achieve. The theory extends to explain why the Institute seems to know everything that happens on the surface, despite rarely sending agents above ground. They don't need human spies infiltrating settlements when they have hundreds of teddy bear cameras watching from every corner. The information that seems impossibly detailed, the knowledge of events that should be secret, the uncanny ability to predict where targets will be, all of it comes from the teddy bear network feeding continuous intelligence to Institute analysts. This would explain synth replacements that seem too perfect to be coincidence. The Institute doesn't just grab random people and hope their synth replacement can convincingly mimic them. They study their targets for weeks or months using teddy bear surveillance, recording speech patterns, mannerisms, relationships, daily routines. By the time they're ready to make a replacement, they have so much data that the synth can step into the target's life seamlessly because they've literally watched everything that person does. Some players have reported teddy bears appearing to move between visits to the same location. A bear that was on a desk is now on the floor. A bear that was facing one direction is now facing another. These movements are usually attributed to physics glitches or environmental respawning, but the theory suggests they're evidence of active surveillance units repositioning themselves to improve their sightlines or track moving targets. The bears might not move while you're watching, but they could adjust their positions during the time between your visits to a location. Subtle movements, small changes in angle or position that optimize their camera views. You'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it, and even then, you'd probably blame the game engine rather than considering that the bears are actually moving with purpose. There's also the matter of teddy bear distribution patterns that mirror Institute operations. When the Institute is actively running operations in an area, teddy bear sightings increase. When an area is depopulated or abandoned, bears disappear or get moved to active locations. This suggests the network is dynamic, responding to Institute priorities by redistributing surveillance assets to wherever they're most needed. The theory gets darker when you consider what this means for privacy in the Commonwealth. Every conversation you've had near a teddy bear has potentially been recorded. Every settlement meeting, every private moment, every strategic discussion with faction leaders, all of it captured and transmitted to Institute servers. The Railroad's secret hideouts aren't as secret as they think if there are teddy bears watching. The Brotherhood's tactical plans aren't secure if bears are positioned in their bases. The Minutemen's rebuilding efforts are completely transparent if every settlement has surveillance units monitoring them. And no one suspects because they're teddy bears. They're pre-war children's toys, remnants of a dead world, objects of nostalgia and sadness. People walk past them every day without considering that they might be anything other than what they appear. That's perfect camouflage. Hide in plain sight by being so ordinary, so expected, that no one questions your presence. The Institute might even have multiple generations of teddy bear surveillance. The oldest units, placed decades ago, have degraded or been destroyed, but they've been continuously replaced with newer models that incorporate improved technology. The current generation might have better cameras, longer battery life, more sophisticated transmission protocols. And because they all look like identical mass-produced pre-war toys, no one can tell which are first-generation units and which are the latest model. Some versions of the theory suggest that not all teddy bears are passive surveillance. Some might be equipped with weapons, capable of deploying gas or poison if the Institute needs to eliminate a target in a way that seems like an accident. A raider gang that mysteriously dies overnight could be a teddy bear releasing toxins while they slept. A settlement leader who suddenly collapses might be a bear delivering a targeted nerve agent. The perfect assassin is the one no one sees as a threat. The really paranoid version of the theory suggests that some teddy bears aren't just surveillance, but active manipulation tools. They could be equipped with speakers playing infrasound frequencies that affect human behavior and emotion, making people feel anxious in certain areas or calm in others. They could emit pheromones or subtle airborne chemicals that influence decision-making. The Institute could be using the bears not just to watch the surface, but to control it, nudging wastelanders toward choices that benefit Institute goals without anyone realizing they're being manipulated. This would explain seemingly irrational behavior patterns in NPCs. Why does that settler keep wandering to a specific location despite the danger? Because there's a teddy bear there, broadcasting a signal that attracts them, and the Institute wants to observe how people respond to certain stimuli. Why do some settlements accept synth replacements without suspicion, while others are paranoid? Because bears in paranoid settlements emit anxiety-inducing frequencies, while bears in accepting settlements broadcast calming signals. The evidence is circumstantial but extensive. The sheer number of bears, their impossible preservation, the elaborate poses that require recent placement, their concentration in strategically important locations. The Institute's uncanny knowledge of surface events, synth replacements that are too perfect to be achieved without extensive surveillance. All of it points to the teddy bears being more than they appear. But like the best conspiracy theories, it's unfalsifiable. If you destroy every teddy bear you find, you're just paranoid. If you ignore them, you're being watched. And you can never prove which bears are surveillance units and which are genuine pre-war toys, because the Institute's technology is sophisticated enough that the difference would be invisible to surface dwellers without Institute-level scanning equipment. So the teddy bears sit in their poses throughout the Commonwealth, watching with button eyes that might be cameras, listening with fabric ears that might contain microphones, transmitting data through wireless systems built into their stuffing. They're in every settlement, every building, every corner of the wasteland, and whether they're harmless relics or the Institute's most successful intelligence operation, you'll never know for certain. The next time you see a teddy bear in Fallout 4, sitting in a chair or positioned in some elaborate scene, the theory asks you to consider, is that environmental storytelling from the developers, or is it the Institute's surveillance network operating in plain sight, hidden among objects so ordinary that no one would ever suspect they're being watched by stuffed animals that report everything back to scientists in an underground facility who know exactly where you are, what you're doing, and what you're planning, all thanks to an army of teddy bears that you've walked past hundreds of times without ever questioning why there are so many, why they're so well preserved, or why they seem to be watching. You wake up on the morning of October 23rd, 2077, in a perfect suburban home in Sanctuary Hills. You have a spouse you love, a baby son named Sean, a Mr. Handy robot butler. It's the American dream realized, right before nuclear fire turns it into the American nightmare. The bombs fall. You run to Vault 111 with your family. You're frozen in a cryogenic pod. And then, 210 years later, you wake up to find everyone dead, your son kidnapped, and the world destroyed. This is the story Fallout 4 tells you. This is what the game presents as your character's history, the foundation for everything that follows. You're the sole survivor, the last person from Vault 111, searching for your stolen son in a wasteland that's completely alien to you. Everything you do is motivated by this backstory, by the need to find Sean and understand what happened during those 2 centuries you spent frozen. But what if none of it is real? What if the memories of pre-war life, the cryogenic freezing, the kidnapping of your son, what if all of it is false, implanted memories designed to give you purpose and motivation? What if you're not the sole survivor at all, but rather a synthetic being created by the Institute, programmed with false memories and released into the Commonwealth to serve purposes you don't understand? What if everything you remember about being human, about having a family, about life before the war is a lie? This is one of the most disturbing theories in Fallout 4, and it's built on evidence that the game provides but never explicitly confirms or denies. Let's start with the most obvious problem with the official story: the cryogenic freezing. You're told that you were frozen for 210 years, kept in suspended animation while the world ended and rebuilt itself multiple times over. And when you emerge, you're fine. No muscle atrophy from centuries of immobility, no psychological trauma from the temporal displacement, no physical degradation from spending 2 centuries as a frozen corpse. Every other person in Vault 111 died in their pods. The life support systems failed, the cryogenic process broke down, and they all perished decades or centuries ago. You can see their frozen corpses throughout the vault, preserved in the pods that became their tombs. But somehow, your pod kept working perfectly for 210 years, maintaining you in stasis while everyone else's failed. That's an incredible stroke of luck, or it's evidence that something else is going on. Real cryogenic preservation, even with advanced technology, should cause significant damage to the human body. Ice crystals form in cells, tissue degrades, brain function is compromised. The technology to actually freeze a human and revive them without catastrophic damage doesn't exist in our world, and while Fallout's world has advanced tech, the game never explains how Vault-Tec solved problems that modern science hasn't even come close to addressing, unless they didn't solve them. Unless the cryogenic preservation was never meant to work long-term and you didn't actually survive it. Unless what walked out of Vault 111 wasn't the person who walked in, but rather a synthetic replacement created by the Institute using the original person's DNA and memories. The theory points to several pieces of evidence that suggest you're a synth. First, there's the Pip-Boy situation. You wake up in Vault 111 without a Pip-Boy, which is strange because Vault dwellers are issued Pip-Boys as standard equipment. The game explains this by having you take a Pip-Boy from a corpse, but think about what that means. The sole survivor, who supposedly lived in Vault 111 before the war, never received the piece of equipment that every Vault dweller gets. Why? The theory suggests it's because you weren't actually in the vault as a resident. You were created recently, implanted with memories of being in the vault, and placed there for someone to find. You don't have a Pip-Boy because you were never issued one, because you were never a real vault dweller. The memory of entering the vault, of being frozen, of living in pre-war sanctuary, all of it is false, uploaded into your synthetic brain to give you an identity and purpose. Then there's your impossible competence in the wasteland. You emerge from 200 years of cryostasis and immediately start killing raiders, crafting weapons, building settlements, navigating the Commonwealth like you've been doing it for years. A real person from 2077 would be completely overwhelmed by the wasteland. The technology is different. The social structures are gone. The entire world operates on principles that didn't exist in your time, but you adapt instantly as if you were designed to thrive in exactly these conditions. VATS, the Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System, is another red flag. The game presents it as a Pip-Boy function, but it's far more advanced than any pre-war targeting computer should be. It slows time, identifies weak points, calculates hit percentages with impossible accuracy. That's not just targeting assistance, that's reality manipulation, or at least computer processing far beyond what a Pip-Boy should be capable of, unless it's not the Pip-Boy doing it at all. Unless VATS is actually a function of your synthetic brain, combat programming designed to make you an effective operative in the field. The theory extends to explain your relationship with the Institute. When you finally reach them, when you meet Father and discover he's your son Sean, now elderly and dying, The reunion feels wrong. Father treats you less like a long-lost parent and more like an experiment that's yielded interesting results. He's curious about you, analytical, measuring your reactions rather than experiencing genuine emotion. And he offers you a position in the Institute almost immediately, as if your arrival was expected, planned for, part of a larger design. What if it was? What if the Institute created you as a test, a synthetic being implanted with memories designed to drive you toward specific goals? They gave you false memories of Sean being kidnapped, knowing it would motivate you to search the Commonwealth, interact with every faction, make alliances and enemies, eventually find your way to the Institute itself. You're not a parent looking for your child. You're a synthetic agent conducting field research, gathering data on surface factions, and testing whether a synth with false memories can successfully infiltrate and navigate wasteland society. Father's lack of emotional response to your arrival makes perfect sense under this theory. He's not seeing his parent, he's seeing the successful conclusion of an experiment he designed. The synthetic being he created, implanted with false memories of being his parent, has completed its programming and arrived at the Institute as predicted. Your presence validates his research into whether synths can be given false identities complex enough to fool not just others, but themselves. This would explain the game's ambiguity about which endings are correct. If you're a synth designed to test different factional outcomes, then every ending is data. Siding with the Institute shows that a synth can successfully integrate with its creators. Siding with the Brotherhood shows that a synth can be turned against the Institute through ideological manipulation. Siding with the Railroad shows that a synth can develop genuine opposition to its creators. Each ending provides valuable information about synth behavior and loyalty. The Memory Den sequence, where you relive the memory of Sean's kidnapping, is particularly suspicious under this theory. You're accessing a memory that you supposedly lived through, but it's presented with glitches, inconsistencies, elements that don't quite align. The theory suggests these are artifacts of memory implantation, errors in the programming that creates false experiences. A real memory wouldn't have these issues, but a synthesized memory, uploaded into a synthetic brain, might contain exactly these kinds of imperfections. Your physical capabilities are also questionable. You survive radiation that should kill you, injuries that should be crippling, falls that should break bones. You can carry impossible amounts of equipment, fight for days without sleep, heal from near death with a single stim pack. These aren't human capabilities, even with wasteland mutations. Their synthetic durability, a body designed for field operations in hostile environments, engineered to withstand punishment that would destroy organic tissue. The implanted memories would explain the special system at the start of the game. You're not actually determining your natural talents, you're selecting which synthetic capabilities to activate. The book you read in your pre-war home that determines your special stats isn't actually teaching you anything. It's a trigger for activating certain subroutines in your programming, disguised as a normal activity to maintain the illusion that you're human. Some versions of the theory suggest that multiple synths like you have been created and released into the Commonwealth, each with similar false memories, but different activation triggers and behavioral parameters. You might encounter other people in the wasteland who believe they're the sole survivor, who have similar stories about Vault 111, who are searching for Sean. They're parallel experiments, different versions of the same synthetic design, all running through the Commonwealth gathering data for the Institute. This could explain why some NPCs seem suspicious of you, why they question your story or don't quite trust your origins. They've seen this before. They've met other people claiming to be from Vault 111, all with similar implausible stories about surviving 200 years of cryostasis. They know something is wrong with your story, even if they can't articulate exactly what. The synth component that can allegedly be found on your body if you somehow manage to kill yourself and loot your own corpse is often dismissed as a bug. But the theory suggests it's proof. That component isn't a glitch in the game engine, it's the truth about what you are, accidentally revealed through mechanics that weren't supposed to let you examine your own inventory after death. Father's final words: if you side with the Institute and he dies of cancer, take on new meaning under this theory. He tells you that you've exceeded his expectations, that you've become more than he designed you to be. He's not talking to his parent, he's talking to his creation, acknowledging that the synthetic being he built has achieved a level of autonomous development beyond what the initial programming intended. The Soul Survivor's memories of pre-war life are suspiciously vague about anything that doesn't directly serve the narrative. You remember your spouse, your son, the day the bombs fell, but try to remember details about your job, your extended family, your childhood, anything that happened before that specific morning in October 2077, and the memories are fuzzy, incomplete, more like generalized impressions than actual experiences. That's consistent with implanted memories focused on creating a specific motivation rather than a complete life history. Every synth in Fallout 4 struggles with the question of whether their memories and experiences are real or programmed. They wonder if their emotions are genuine or just sophisticated simulations of feelings they've been designed to mimic. And you, the player, experience this same uncertainty because the game never definitively confirms that you're human. It leaves open the possibility that you're asking the same questions as Nick Valentine or Dance or any other synth who doesn't know what they are. The emotional weight of this theory is devastating if true. Every decision you've made, every relationship you've formed, every moment of grief over your dead spouse or determination to find Sean, all of it based on false memories, programmed responses, artificial emotions created by the Institute to make you an effective field agent. You're not avenging your family. You're executing programming. You're not searching for your son. You're completing an objective you were literally built to pursue. And the worst part is that you can never know for certain. Even if you discover evidence that you're a synth, that evidence could be false, planted by the Railroad or Brotherhood to undermine your trust in the Institute. Even if Father tells you the truth, how do you know that's the truth and not another layer of manipulation? Even if you find the synth component on your body, maybe that was placed there by someone trying to make you believe you're synthetic when you're actually human. The paranoia is perfect and complete. You can't trust your memories because they might be implanted. You can't trust your feelings because they might be programmed. You can't trust your identity because it might be a construct designed by scientists to serve purposes you'll never fully understand. You are, in the most literal sense possible, questioning what makes you human, whether being human requires organic biology or whether consciousness and experience are enough, regardless of how they're implemented. The theory concludes that it doesn't matter whether you're actually synthetic or actually human, because the uncertainty itself is the point. Fallout 4's story is about identity, about what makes someone real, about whether it matters if your memories and emotions are programmed, if they feel genuine to you. The Soul Survivor's journey is the same whether you're the last human from Vault 111 or a synthetic being with false memories, because in both cases, you're trying to find meaning and purpose in a world that's lost both. And maybe that's the real answer. Maybe the question of whether you're human or synth is deliberately unanswerable, left ambiguous, so that players experience the same existential uncertainty that defines synth existence in the Institute's world. Maybe you're meant to walk through the Commonwealth, never knowing for certain what you are, making choices and forming relationships and building a future while wondering if the person making those choices is real or artificial, human or machine, survivor or experiment. The memories might be false, the body might be synthetic, the emotions might be programmed, but the experience of living through the story, of making choices and facing consequences, of wondering what you are and what that means that's real, regardless of what components make up your body or where your memories came from. And in the wasteland, where everyone is just trying to survive and find meaning in ruins, maybe being real in your own experience is the only kind of real that matters. You are the sole survivor. Or you're a synthetic being designed to believe you're the sole survivor. Or you're something in between, a hybrid of organic and artificial that can't be categorized as simply human or machine. The answer is in Vault 111, in the Institute's records, in Father's final secrets, or in the synthetic component that may or may not exist in your body. Or maybe the answer doesn't exist at all, and you'll walk through the wasteland forever, wondering whether the person asking the question is the same person who entered that vault 210 years ago, or whether that person died in the cryopod and was replaced by something that inherited their memories, but not their humanity, or whether there's any meaningful difference between the two when both of them feel equally real from the inside.